Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Ravi Malick. Ravi is the Chief Information Officer of Box, a cloud content management company that securely connects people, information, and applications and earns roughly $1 billion in annual revenue. Ravi's been in role for a bit more than 2 years, and he's helped mature and transform the IT function at that fast-growing digital native company, drawing upon his experience at a number of scaled organizations like Vistra, where he was the CIO prior to his current post. I look forward to hearing more about his journey of transformation through this conversation. Ravi Malick, welcome to Technovation. Great to speak with you today.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate you having me.
Looking forward to the conversation. Let's start with your own description of Box's business, if you would. Tell me a bit about the business you're in.
Wow. So Box is the leading cloud content management platform. I think north of 70% of Fortune 500 companies use Box to manage their content or unstructured data. I think this is an area that we're seeing the market understanding and education really start to hockey stick in terms of what is it about unstructured data and content that is really important and essential to the enterprise and new companies, right? If you think about it, for a long time, structured data, big data, analytics, all of that has been, in the forefront. It's pretty much table stakes now. Unstructured data now is starting to get that kind of hype that the big data used to get, right? Because if you think about how work gets done, it's all around content, right? Whether it's a memo, it's a presentation, it's a spreadsheet. And what's really interesting is, I think it's something like 58% of companies don't have a really well-baked strategy or understanding of what is in their unstructured data. And what's also interesting is we find that structured data has a tendency to migrate into unstructured data as well, right? So finance people love to download an Excel. You need to look at employee data, you download an Excel. And so, that data, which is some of the most sensitive and private information, for a company, is essential. And so, Box is really the platform that allows you to manage that, curate it, continue to leverage it at scale, and integrate, into the other applications in your ecosystem.
Yeah, great overview, and very interesting how that puts you at the center of a lot of really interesting trends and topics across organizations. I look forward to getting some further insights a little later in our conversation as to what you're hearing from peer CIOs. But speaking of Chief Information Officer, talk about your role as CIO. What's within your purview, Ravi?
So my role's 50-50. So 50% internal, which is doing the things that CIOs do, running IT and security and those kinds of things, developing our worldwide technology strategy to support the growth and scaling of the company. And then the exciting part of my job is the 50% external. So I get to be a brand advocate, work with other executives, customers, opportunities, work with our sales and marketing teams on creating and developing go-to-market strategies that enable us to connect, with the right folks within an organization and educate them on the power of Box as the cloud content platform.
Very interesting. I'll look forward to hearing a bit more about both sides of those. And I know, obviously, Box, as many will be familiar with the company, especially those interested in technology, will know that this is a fast-growing organization. That's not new for you, though. I mentioned your past role as CIO of Vistra, which grew from 10 billion in revenue to 17 billion in the 10 years you were part of the company. So you're used to really dramatic growth, but they were at a scale that Box has yet to achieve, no doubt will eventually. And I have to imagine that you were probably brought in to some extent to help the organization diagnose the sorts of things that it needed to do in order to prepare for that next leap to another order of magnitude of revenue. What did you diagnose in the early days, a little more than 2 years ago when you joined the company, as some of the early areas to focus on in helping the organization mature?
Well, I think scalability is absolutely the theme of what that focus was. And it is, what's interesting is, and I know some other folks have said this as well, that technology companies don't necessarily do IT better just because they're a technology company. And so the things that you look at and you focus on are, where do you have opportunities and where do you have opportunities to scale? where is there friction, right, that is going to prevent that scalability? Is that technology? Is that process? Is it people? The combination of two, the combination of all three. And I think, really where the opportunities that I have found coming in are extending the planning horizon, right? So thinking not 12 months, 18 months, but really like, where do we want to be in 3 years? Where do we want to be in 5 years? Yes, we want to be a $2 billion company, but what does that actually look like? What do the processes look like? What does the technology stack look like? The enemy of scalability can be complexity. But complexity can also be a competitive advantage. And so you have to find that right balance of where can I simplify? Where does it make sense to simplify? And where do I need to keep the complexity because it does give me a competitive advantage, right? So getting people to understand, hey, 99% of the world does their financials this way. And so we should leverage, right, standard processes, right? Same thing in people and benefits and those things. Leverage standard as much as you can, right? But really focus the energy on on the complexity, on the things that make the business different, right? And really give us a competitive edge. That's where we want the complexity. That's where we want, to invest in things maybe to be custom, and to be more complex. But where we can standardize, where we can consolidate, where we can simplify, which not only reduces the cost, but also reduces the risk. Obviously, the more applications that you have in your environment, the more risk you have from a security standpoint and an operational standpoint. So I think that's where we've been focusing a lot of energy. What is the picture 3 to 5 years from now, which sometimes is challenging, particularly, for technology companies, because you think technology is changing so fast, right? And you've got to be flexible. You got to have that agility, which I don't disagree with, but I think you've got to be selective where you have that agility and where you have that flexibility. And I think the most important thing is, as you're growing and scaling as a company, is to retain speed of decision making, right? Execution, you have to appreciate growth and scale. You have to appreciate a global real estate portfolio, people in different time zones, 2,500 people versus 100 people, right? That is, execution is really where you start to see that. But decision making, be able to make decisions quickly, I think is critically important. And I think that's, understanding that, don't lose that, right? Retain that from the startup culture, but understand like execution becomes, you have to be more deliberate, right? It becomes more challenging as you grow as a company.
I really like the way you framed that, Ravi. And so many people think of complexity as purely a negative thing, but I really like the way you've talked about, embrace a complexity in those areas where it's differentiating, where you are going to do things custom, develop things yourself, but then also diagnose those areas where simplification ought to be the mantra, and developing that right balance such that you're differentiating and creating new levels of value that will give you competitive advantage, while also simplifying so that you're accomplishing that nimbleness where that's wherever you can as well. I really like the way in which you balance that. So appreciate that. I wanted to also just dive a little bit further into your external role, an unusual aspect of what you do. As you said, as much as 50% of your role is spent with customers as an advocate for Box. And very interesting, since, of course, so many of those customers themselves are chief information officers or members of their teams. Talk a bit about that interaction, how you interact with your peers as CIOs. Different, I'm sure, than the salespeople within Box, of course, more as a peer. But how does that dialogue unfold? How do you engage that community?
Well, so, CIOs, I think it is a small world, the CIO world. A big part of that network and that world orbits around sort of group therapy and understanding what you go through as a CIO and the challenges. I think just there's that commonality, right? And I think there's a mutual respect for one another in that space, that if a CIO reaches out to another CIO, you respond, you have some engagement. I think that is something that I certainly extend to my CIO peers and colleagues, and feel that that same that same courtesy is extended to me. I like to talk about technology, just whether it's content or management, unstructured data, or just everything technology oriented. Obviously, I have a bend towards, hey, how can we make sure that you're maximizing your investment in Box? Here's what other customers do. Here's what I've done or what I did as a customer. Here's why I think it's important. And really just, a lot of it's just education, right? I'm not there to sell them. I'm there to pretty much kind of provide the straight view and the straight talk, right? Like, how can you do more with the platform? Where do we have challenges? Where is the roadmap going, right? And again, why is this important? Why should you be thinking about it? And moving it up in the tier of applications or in the tier of prioritization, as you're thinking about what you need to do as a CIO. Why is content so important? Why does it need to be secured? Why do you need to know who's accessing it, who's managing it? And that's, I spent a lot of time on that, but I also, we spent a lot of time on just general technology strategy. I mean, I love learning and hearing from other CIOs about how they're addressing problems, not just data, but, how are they looking to up level their interaction with customers? How are they leveraging data? What do they feel is, what's useful, what's not useful? And a lot of times it's, we just talk about leadership, right? And how do you be a more effective leader, particularly a more effective technology leader, which is really, I think 10, 15 years ago, it was, hey, I'm a technology leader and I need to understand business. And I think it's flipped now to where I'm a business leader with a focus on technology. And I think, that migration, that shift, has really, put, I wouldn't say pressure, but enabled CIOs to really extend themselves more into the business and, be viewed as business leaders, not just a technology leader.
I like that way of framing things. Thank you for that. And as an advocate for Box, it must be incumbent upon you to be customer zero for the company, to be well immersed in your product set, so that you can speak with authority. Needless to say, talk a bit about the way in which you engage with the product within your own team, much like your peers might choose to do within their teams and other companies.
Yeah, so we have a box on box program. So it is run out of IT, but with very deep partnership with our customer service organization and our sales organization. How we use Box and how we maximize the platform and the use cases that we develop and that we enable ourselves is probably one of the best tools that we have to show customers how you get value out of it and why content is important. It's something I'm very passionate about, being customer zero, and providing not only the insight of like, hey, here's kind of where we are running into limitations, or where we are really pushing the bounds of the product internally, but also folding in, this is what I hear from customers, right? And here's what they're looking for, and we have similar needs as well. Having that direct line into engineering, into product, to be able to be the first ones to beta test new features. I mean, it's a really fun part about being at a technology company, that you get the advanced insight into capabilities and features, and then we figure out like, okay, what is it going to take, right? How do we make sure that if we bring somebody in and we open up our doors and have them go through that, they can see, oh yeah, I see how you guys think about security when it comes to content. I see how you think about it as a single layer across your application stack. I see the power of the integrations and the automation, and all of the features that a lot of times, they get lost because you're just thinking about, hey, I need to put my content somewhere. And it's really so much more than that.
Yeah, super interesting. You mentioned that in your many interactions with peers, you love to delve into tech strategy and talk a bit about like areas they're focused on. I realize, of course, that must be a wide array of things, but are there, as you synthesize that or boil that down a little bit further, what are some of the things that are rising to the top among the agendas you see among other CIOs?
I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say AI.
Yeah. And you're among them, I know, focused
Yes.
on that.
Oh, for sure. For sure. So, the top two by far, it's AI and cybersecurity.
Hmm.
Those are the top two by far. I think there are other less technology specific themes that we're seeing, right? And I always think about how I'm managing technology in three dimensions: maximizing value, minimizing risk, and managing cost, right? And how those three work together. And sometimes one is more important than the other, but I really do feel like those are the three things. When you boil everything else down, that's what we think about, right? Maximizing value, minimizing risk, and managing cost. And I think right now what we're seeing is a lot of focus on managing cost and minimizing risk. And the challenge there is understanding that those don't have to be mutually exclusive from the maximizing value, right? If you can figure out how to check all three boxes, which is, I think the mental gymnastics that I try and do every day, I think you're doing the right things certainly as a technology leader. Now, AI and cybersecurity, right? I mean, I think those are obviously the topics of the day. Everybody is thinking about AI. Obviously, Box AI, which we had announced earlier, the space that we're in, what we do. This is incredibly meaningful for us, and something honestly, when I was a customer, was thinking, okay, how do you amplify the value of your content? How do you get more insights? How do you really leverage it and make it reusable? Because I think some of the challenge, particularly in the space, is that content gets created a lot, and I think it's a really high percentage. I want to say it's maybe north of 50% of content that gets created goes unused or is not reused. And I think this is where AI for us can be a game changer in really elevating productivity. And as I like to say, it's like productivity on steroids. When like you're not constantly recreating the wheel, right? And that's not occurring in multiple areas of the company. You're able to leverage what has already been created and tweak it. The cybersecurity, I think, two very much interrelated in that we have always leveraged AI, and this goes back to Box Skills within our product, but it was at a deeper layer, right? And I think this is when you think about AI before the whole Chat GPT thing, it was there, right? A lot of companies were thinking about it, a lot of products were incorporating it. And if you use Gmail, you've got the predictive writing, right? Those kinds of things. But it was maybe two or three layers. Now it's in the hands of every user. And so that power of I can define and use this in a way that is meaningful just for me, but also is meaningful for the enterprise. You have a technology that, I mean, it really, the power of it is still unrealized. But the ability to drive value from the top down, which has traditionally been, you implement technology, you define a use case, you get an executive sponsor, right? That's driven top down. You have the business case. But now with ChatGPT, you can do that and you can drive it from the bottom up. So you have that ability to meet in the middle, which I think is really where the real value to the enterprise is.
Yeah, really interesting diagnosis of that. I wanted to also ask you, Ravi, as somebody who's been a chief information officer multiple times over, as I noted before, Vistra Energy, Box, you've been a tech leader across multiple organizations now. What have been some of the difference makers for you along the way on your rise to becoming a CIO? Perhaps colored for towards others who might wish to walk in your footsteps. What advice would you have, and what's been most impactful for you?
Well, I think the number one thing is know the numbers. I have kind of a different path to the CIO seat. I spent the first half of my career more on the business side and spent time in investment banking and consulting, and then doing software and financial services startups, where I was mostly on the business side, sales, marketing, and finance. I think understanding that aspect, and particularly finance, I had a mentor very early in my career who I'm basically borrowing his phrase, which was know the numbers, right? Know your numbers. And it wasn't just know the numbers, the metrics for your area of the business, know the financials, know how you tie to the balance sheet, and be able to talk and speak about particularly technology in terms that can be connected financially, because at the end of the day, that's the common language of every company, is the financials. It's how every company is going to be measured. It's how you determine success. Yes, there are other barometers and whatnot, but at the end of the day, are you profitable? What's your revenue? Right? What's your retention? What's your ARR in our industry? It always comes back to the financials. I think so. Having that foundation was, I wish I could say it was a beautifully and well thought out plan. It just sort of happened, right? And it happened as I started to move, when I moved from business into IT, and when I would talk to peers about the value of technology, right? What was it going to do for the business? Not just this was some new technology that automated process, but here are the things that it's going to influence, right? Here are the needles that it's going to move. I think it fast tracked and sped up the support, the understanding, and the decision, to say yes on a lot of, big key initiatives and smaller ones as well.
I wanted to also ask you, Ravi, you were a political science major at Brown. You started off in the quote unquote business, as you said, in iBanking and in consulting. What was your pathway into technology? You learned a lot of the business acumen clearly in those early stages, and that stayed with you. And it's been a fundamental aspect, a differentiating factor for you as a leader on your rise. How about the technology side? How did you, clearly something you've learned professionally as opposed to academically? What's been your pathway to developing an expertise such that you're a leader of the function?
So I've always been fascinated with technology. Even as a kid, I taught myself BASIC, Pascal. I was the kid who took things apart, wanted to see how they worked, tried to put them back together, sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully. But I think it's sort of how my mind works, numbers and technology. And when I transitioned from investment banking into consulting at PwC, that's where it really it was supercharged. At that time, people were still doing big ERP implementations, and IT and the whole space was really starting to accelerate in a major way. And that's where I learned enterprise technology and really got the foundation of, this is what it does for the business. Here's how you need to think about designing it. Here's how you need to think about building it. Here's how you need to think about managing it. And I loved it. I mean, it was great. I loved it. I loved at that time, the satisfaction of building something and seeing it work and seeing it run. As I moved on later in my career and got into the startup world and started in consulting in that area, doing implementations, I think eventually figured out that I was not as good a programmer as I thought I was. When you're working with folks from Stanford and MIT, like real, super brain programmers and developers, you realize very quickly that either you are cut from that cloth or you're not. But I can understand it, right? I could read the code. I know what's going on. I can understand the technology, how it works together, how it should work together. And so, I mean, it stayed with me and has stayed with me throughout my career. Even on the business side, I was always thinking, okay, how do I get people, process, and technology working as efficiently as possible? With technology being a big part of that.
Well, Ravi, thank you so much for those reflections and for a great conversation, more generally speaking, emblematic of the remarkable things you and your team are doing at Box, and also just this fascinating purview you have as a part traditional chief information officer, though at a fast-growing tech company, but also as an external advocate for the organization as well. Appreciate you sharing some insights from the various hats you wear within your role also. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you again for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation.